The Roman Catholics and the Protestants teach that what you see here of me is just an outward casing. The real me is inside, and the real you is inside you. The outside here is just a package, but the real you is inside. They teach this, the Roman Catholics and the Protestants, and say that you have an immortal soul, that the real you is kind of inside of you, and it continually lives. It is immortal. It goes on forever. And so the real thinking, talking, meditating you is inside you as an immortal life, an immortal soul. And so it continues at death. So death is just the outward physical garment of your skin, you dying and dissolving, but the real you continues to live, to think, to talk, to walk, because they say, as a Christian, if you're a good Christian, you will, upon death, this physical body wearing out and dying, you will go to heaven. You will be in heaven immediately. The second after you close your eyes in death and the physical body is dead, they say you will be immediately in heaven. You continue to live. This teaching has a great problem with John, the 11th chapter, and the death of Lazarus. It does say there very plainly that Lazarus dies. He is dead. And they were crying over his death. And Jesus finally gets to them, and they're all so sorrowful because, well, Lazarus is no longer with them in this physical life. But, of course, he's gone to heaven. And they are still so sorrowful because they won't have any more time with him on this physical earth. Jesus raises Lazarus from death. And so in modern theological terms, he brings Lazarus, who was now in heaven, enjoying the heavenly throne and the Father and the angels and the seraphim and all the other created beings in heaven. He's enjoying all of that, but Jesus brings him back down into his physical body that was 4 days in the grave, decomposing. But of course, God works miracles, so that's nothing to him to have his body all 100% okay again. Puts him back, brings him down from heaven, puts him back into his body in the grave, and then tells him to come forward and then to unwrap him. And Lazarus is now once again living as a physical human being, and Mary and Martha can now enjoy him again, and all of his other friends can enjoy him. Now, that is the teaching then of the immortality of the soul that the Roman Catholics and the Protestants want to teach. And that's how it would have to be then with Lazarus. And that Jesus brings him back down from heaven and puts him back into a physical body, and he lives again for a physical time with Mary and Martha. Well, of course, the fundamental Protestants probably have a way of getting around that. They will say, well, because God knew and Jesus knew that he was going to do this, that this was going to happen, that Jesus knew he was going to raise him from the dead, well, he didn't really take him to heaven. God the Father in heaven didn't really bring him up to heaven, but he was there somewhere, but not in heaven. So ask yourself, well, where was Lazarus? I mean, was he 1 foot above himself, kind of looking over down at himself? Was he up in the clouds, looking down on the earth and down on Jerusalem, or where he had died, and looking down upon his grave site and his old body decomposing? Was Lazarus up in the clouds looking down? Was he on the moon? Was he on Mars? Was he on planet Pluto? He was somewhere, but not in heaven, because Christ knew that he was going to raise him from the dead. So no, he didn't really go to heaven. Now that's an argument that the Protestants might use. He was just kind of there, floating around somewhere, ready to be brought back into his physical body, but not up in heaven. Well, then you have to say to yourself, well, maybe the Roman Catholics have a truth that there is a purgatory, a kind of intermediate state where you go under certain circumstances, you go there into this purgatory place that is in between earth and heaven, where God the Father is, and that you're kind of held there until, under this special circumstances, something else is done with you. And so if he was then not in heaven, he had to be somewhere, because he has an immortal soul, which is the real you, they teach. So he had to be somewhere. So maybe the Roman Catholics have a pretty half-decent doctrine by saying that there is a purgatory, a place where you can be held until it is finally decided where you go. This is not what the Gospel of John chapter 11 teaches. We need to go there and read what the 11th chapter of John really teaches. You can read chapter 11, verses 1 to 13. Well, verses 1 to 12. And verse 12, the disciples thought that if Jesus was talking about Lazarus sleeping, it was kind of a good thing. He's having a physical rest, like we do at nighttime. And so his disciples thought it was pretty good that he should be having a rest. But Jesus said in verse 13, howbeit Jesus spoke of his death. But they thought he spoke of a rest in sleep. But Jesus was actually speaking of his death. Then said Jesus unto them plainly, Lazarus is dead. Plain words. Jesus likened death to a sleep. And when you sleep at night, you do not know how time passes. You wake up in the morning and you have no idea that 6, 7, 8 hours has gone by. It just seems like a second. You go to sleep, the next thing you know, you're awake, but you look at the clock and it's 6 hours or 7 hours or 8 hours that you have been asleep, not knowing the process of time. And so Jesus said, verse 14, Lazarus is dead. And then he goes to the place where Lazarus is. He meets Martha. Then Martha, verse 20, as soon as she heard that Jesus was coming, went and met him. But Mary sat still in the house. Then said Martha unto Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now, whatsoever a person will ask of God, God will give it. Jesus said unto her, your brother shall rise again. And now what did Martha say? Did Martha say, well, I know he's up in heaven, Lord, and he's enjoying himself, and one day I will die and I will, go to heaven and I will be with him and so forth. And I know that, he's still alive up in heaven, and one day I'll go to join him. No, verse 24, Martha said unto him, I know that he shall rise again in the resurrection at the last day. Jesus said unto her, I am the resurrection and the life. He that believes in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. And whosoever lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? He said to Martha. Notice Jesus' words. If you believe in him, if you live in him, do and live how he lived, and believe in him, believe all the words that he preached and taught, he shall never die. They will say now, the Roman Catholics and the Protestants, there you go. It says there that you don't really die upon death. Well, we'll go to the Greek and Hebrew scholar J.P. Green. Yes, J.P. Green Sr., and we'll read in his interlinear Greek-English New Testament for the phrase, that he shall never die. This is how Green translates the Greek. In no way shall he die forever. And there is the truth of it. If you follow and live in Jesus Christ and believe in him, believe his words, you shall not die forever. Because what is the context that we've just been reading about? The resurrection. The resurrection of being brought back to life from death. And so indeed you will not die forever, because you will be resurrected and brought back to life. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15 that you will be brought back to immortal life. And when this mortal puts on immortality, and you can read that, the resurrection chapter, many people call it, 1 Corinthians 15, that we are mortal. We do not have an immortal soul that goes on living the moment that this physical body dies. If we did, and if we go to heaven, if you're a good child of God, then Lazarus was up in heaven for 4 days. And we have nothing in this chapter that Lazarus tells us about how wonderful heaven is and why have you brought me back? I was up in heaven. Why didn't you leave me alone? I was just enjoying all the things that are in heaven and I'm with God the Father. What are you bringing me back for? No such talk as that. There's no talk here about how Lazarus tells them how wonderful it is in heaven, and they wrote these things down, and somehow, though, it got not put into the New Testament, but he told them all about these wonderful things that he saw and was with, and all the saints of the past that he was with, and Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Elijah, and Enoch, and Moses, and how he was just enjoying himself with all of these children of God up in heaven. No talk about that whatsoever. No, this section is talking about coming back to life from death via a resurrection. Verse 27, then said unto him, Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, which should come into the world. And when he had said this, she went away. Now Mary comes, and Mary says the same thing, we missed Lazarus, and if you'd been here, he would have died, and you could have kept him alive, and so forth. And Jesus sees them all weeping and crying, so he wept as well. And then they talk about his body being 4 days and it was decomposing, but in any case, Jesus goes on, and he went to the grave, and he told Lazarus to come forth. And Lazarus was, according to the Catholics and the Protestants, he was either in purgatory or somewhere in limbo or up in heaven and brought back down, put into his physical body, and he lives again. Now, don't think that I don't know all of the arguments about this immortal soul and about death. I've heard them all. I've read them all from the Catholics and the Protestants. Don't make the mistake of thinking that I don't know all of these arguments. And it's not the place here to go into answering all those arguments, but it is on my website. And on my website, under the heading life, death, and resurrections, I go into all of the arguments about death and eternal life, about Enoch being in heaven, about Elijah going up into heaven in a whirlwind, and so forth. I answer all of those arguments, all of them, on my website under Life, Death, and the Resurrection.